video, I'm going to run through the techniques used in my new Welsh heel sock pattern. It's called Sawdl, which is the Welsh word, I understand, for heel. I kept it really simple, but it's still a foreign word. The Welsh heel is a cuff-down sock that uses a heel flap. Over the last few years, I've been really focused on toe-up socks because they're easy and it's an easy thing for people to learn. This is a little bit different. Cuff-down socks fit a little differently. I've sized this pattern for men and women, and I would say that this is an intermediate pattern. It's if you're an experienced knitter, it's probably fine for your first pair of socks. If you've never knit socks before and you're maybe still kind of a new knitter, I'm going to give you a link to the pattern I recommend for first-time sock knitters. Then you can knit this as your second pair, I guess. I did some research into the traditional Welsh heel on socks, and I was looking at the history of hand knitting by Richard Rutt. And I didn't get an exact answer, but I know that in the 17th century, the Welsh people were knitting a lot of socks for sale, especially in England. So that was a big part of the commerce, was selling hand knit socks made in Wales. And so my guess is that, this is just what I'm thinking, is that the Welsh came up with a unique heel. You know, it's still a heel flap and kind of a traditional thing, but they came up with something that looked different so you could distinguish Welsh socks from other socks. Try to say Welsh socks 100 times without tripping on that. So that's my guess. I don't know if there is another source, maybe I can get a little more history on it, but it is a traditional heel flap kind of a sock, but the heel flap and turning the heel are really unique. If you would like to get your copy of the pattern to follow along, just click the little eye in the upper right-hand corner. That will take you to my website. This is knit with fingering weight yarn and size US 1 or 2.5 millimeter needles, sized for men and women. It uses 100 grams of yarn. I'll tell you, you know, I've knit dozens of pairs of socks and I always get 100 grams of yarn for socks, right? Well, when I knit these men's socks, I use more than 100 grams. And I knit them for my friend Steven, and I was kind of surprised. I said, you know what, these socks took more than 100 grams for, you know, crew length socks. And he's like, yeah. I was like, do you always have to buy 200 grams of sock yarn for your socks? And he's like, yeah, he wasn't surprised. But here's the thing. If you do buy 200 grams of yarn to knit men's socks, you're not going to use the whole 200 grams. And the yarn that you have left over will still make a pair of women's socks, the crew length, the mid-calf size. So the yarn won't go to waste. It's just that I didn't realize that men's feet were that much bigger that you had to buy an extra hank of yarn. Anyway, enough of that. In the next section, we're going to get started with the oh, one more thing I want to say. Whatever your preferred method is for knitting socks, whether that's magic loop, double pointed needles, 9-inch circulars, whatever it is, this pattern will work with those. Throughout the tutorial, I will tell you what method I use when I'm knitting these myself. But you know, it's entirely up to you. Especially if you have experience knitting socks, you probably have a favorite way of doing it. All of it will work. You can use anything that you like. Next up, we will get started with the cast on. If you have your pattern and your yarn and your needles and you're ready to get started, I'm going to walk through all of the techniques used in these socks, but first I want to give you a close-up of the heel and the unique heel. Okay, this pair I actually have on my sock blockers because you can see the gusset decreases here, the heel flap here. So this is actually not blocked though. I just stuck it on there. And here it is off the sock blocker because this is what I wanted to show you. The heel flap in the back has a column of purl stitches. And I posted pictures of these socks in progress on Instagram and Facebook, and people asked, you know, can't you feel that? Isn't that like a seam? It's like, nope, it's on the inside, it's a knit stitch, it's perfectly flat. You can't feel this when you're wearing it. And that purl column continues into the turning of the heel part. And it is a really unique heel turn, and that's what is the most unique thing about this sock is the line in the heel flap and the way the heel is turned. And we're going to get to all of that. And this first part here is the ribbing, and we are doing a knit through the back loop 1-by-1 rib, and that's what we're going to get started with here. So I have most of the cast on finished here. I'm going to be working with fewer stitches on much bigger needles using much thicker yarn so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to get started on double pointed needles. Again, you can use whatever method you want to use. I like working rib on double pointed needles and then switching to 9-inch circulars. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and shorten this tail, keep it out of my way. So when I'm getting started on double pointed needles from the cast on row, I get it set up, making sure that nothing is twisted with my working yarn over here on the right. This is going to be the first stitch that I knit. And this first stitch, I'm going to do a regular knit stitch, okay, just because it's easier. And now we're joined in the round. And I'll purl, and this rib is knit through the back loop. So I'm going to yarn back, and then instead of going into the stitch the normal way, I am going to go into the back loop of the stitch, which twists it. And it makes that ribbing look unique. It kind of makes the column of twisted knit stitches kind of pops off the fabric. So just knit through the back loop, purl one all the way around. Anyway, you probably don't need to watch me do that. Just mark your rows and keep doing that all the way around because the really exciting stuff is coming up. And this is a little sample that I've worked here that is, again, just worked in really thick yarn using really big needles so you can see what I'm doing. I'm ready to get started with the heel flap here. I've finished my ribbing and I've finished the stockinette part of the cuff. I'm ready to get started with the heel. And well, let's just go through the steps that are used. I am actually going to switch to double pointed needles on this part. I think it's easier. So I'm going to slip the first stitch. Oh, and let me just explain. Actually, let me go back here. Let me approach this all. Okay, I have the stitch marker here because when I'm doing videos, I talk all the time and I knew that I'm not very good at counting. So I gave that to myself so I know where to put the purl stitch in the heel flap. And I put this stitch marker here so that I know where to stop the heel flap. So I'm going to slip the first stitch by going in as if to purl and just slipping it over. And then I'm going to knit up. Just follow the pattern and knit up the number it says to knit up for the size that I'm knitting. And then I'm going to, on the right side of the work, I'm going to purl that stitch. Then knit up to the end, or just the number that the pattern says for the size. Okay, so I wanted to show you this on the 9-inch circulars because I am just going to leave these stitches on the 9-inch circulars. The 9-inch circular is going to just act like a stitch holder while I'm working back and forth on the heel flap stitches. So that's just going to hang there. It's not going anywhere. I'm not working in the round anymore. I'm going to turn the work, and I want the purl stitches facing me now because I'm going to work across these same stitches. I'm going to slip the first stitch as if to purl. Purl across to what is called the seam stitch. We're making a ton of noise with those 9-inch circulars on the blocking board. And then on the wrong side rows, I'm going to yarn back and knit that stitch and then purl the rest of the way across. Okay. And you'll end up just knitting back and forth on that heel flap until, through the magic of video, you end up with this. So I have this on DPNs now, but on the other example, it was on 9-inch circulars. I have the heel flap finished and I'm ready to turn the heel. And I'm going to, for turning the heel, you really just want to follow the instructions for the size you're knitting, but there's one thing I definitely want to show you so that it makes sense when you're doing it on your own. There are a couple of, oh, there's like one setup row, okay? I'm going to slip a stitch and you're just going to follow it. I'm going to knit some. I'm going to yarn over, knit 2 together, knit some more. My example is not right with the numbers, right? Knit 2 together, knit 1. I get to the seam stitch and I purl it. Knit 1, knit 2 together, knit some more, knit 2 together. Okay, so I worked that first kind of setup row, and I'm going to turn the work without finishing all of these stitches in the row. So I turn the work, and now I'm working row 2 of turning the heel. And this is really what I wanted to show you. This is the reason that we're in here with these all of these knit 2 togethers. Is the first stitch is a yarn over, and it's a little awkward, but you get used to it. So I'm going to yarn over just by taking the yarn and wrapping it around the right needle, and then putting some tension on that right needle so that it's not a big loose stitch, right? And then I've pulled the yarn forward because the next stitch is a purl. And I'll purl across, knit the seam stitch. And I'm really putting seam in quotation marks because it isn't really a seam. It's just a row of knit stitches. Okay, and then on the knit side, you always start with a yarn over here too. And so you're going to yarn over, and then the first stitch is knit 2 together. So you've just got it kind of flopped over the right needle, and you go right into your knit 2 together. I think I split a stitch, but we're good. Okay. That is the main thing I wanted to show you, is the yarn over at the beginning of each of the short rows. You're going to follow the instructions to work back and forth across the heel stitches until you have the heel turned. And that's what we have here. I just love it. I love sock construction so much because this is awesome. Look, we just changed direction with our knitting. This is the back of the heel and this is the sole of the foot, and boom, look at that. And we have this unique Welsh heel going with the column of purl stitches all the way down. I love it, I love it, I love it. Okay, so this next step, and this is traditional for all heel flap, cuff down heel flap socks. Our working yarn is here and the heel flap. We're going to work across these stitches and pick up stitches along the sides of the heel flap. And we're not going to maintain this column of purl stitches anymore. So I'm going to knit across the turned heel stitches, the heel flap stitches. And then using the same needle, I'm going to pick up and knit along this side of this heel flap. And if you look, the V's are facing this direction, and you want to go under both legs of the V while you're doing it. And it's a different number for the different sizes, but the numbers that I've given you are enough to pick up one for each V and an extra one at the top and an extra one at the bottom to avoid holes. So here's our extra one at the top. I'm just going to cram a stitch in there. And then the next one is I'll go into the V. I go under both legs of the V, wrap the needle and pull it through. And make sure that your heel flap isn't rolling up on itself, because it's stockinette it wants to. Unroll it so you're seeing the very edge stitch. And just go under both legs of the V and pick that up. and then cram an extra stitch in there. And the reason we're doing that is because we're changing directions with our knitting, and cramming a couple of extra stitches in there is easily worked through on the gusset decreases, which we're about to do. And it keeps there from being holes. Now on this next bit, the inset stitches that have been held, I'm going to take one needle and just work across all of these stitches. If it was on 2 needles before, you can combine it onto one. And then pick up a new needle, and again, pick up the same number along this side, and then you'll knit across to the center back of the heel, and that'll be the new beginning of your round, which will look like this. Whoops. Nope, there isn't a sample for that. That is it. I don't know what I was looking for. You will knit to the center of the round here. That's funny. And then you'll start working the decreases. You'll knit to the end of this needle here, decrease, decrease at the beginning of the instep stitches, at the end of the instep stitches, and at the beginning of the gusset stitches here. You just follow the numbers for the pattern, and you just keep knitting around and around until you get back to the original number of stitches you had when you cast on. I had so many samples here, I guess I just thought that every single step along the way I was going to have a new sample. But no, that actually explains everything as far as how that works. Next up, we're going to talk about finishing the socks. These are everything you need to know to actually knit the socks, because after that you're just going to knit a tube like you did for the cuff and then do some decreases for the toe. And then the last step is the Kitchener stitch at the toe, which we haven't done in a tutorial for a long time because they've all been toe-up socks, and that's coming up next. In this section, I'm going to show you how to work the Kitchener stitch. If you're familiar with working cuff down socks, this isn't going to be a mystery to you, but we'll go ahead and cover it so the tutorial is complete. Let's take a look. I have this little tiny toe sample. It's not little tiny because it's knit in this huge chunky yarn or worsted weight yarn, and different DPNs, of course. How many DPNs have I used in this tutorial? I am going to slide these stitches onto the same needle. Makes it a little bit easier to work Kitchener stitch. And so I have the same number of stitches on the back and front needle, and I've cut the yarn and left a long tail, my tapestry needle. So I'm going to, this is going to give us, it's going to seam up the toe without giving us a seam. So it looks just like knitting, it's really comfortable on the foot. It's a little extra work, but it goes pretty quickly. First thing I'm going to do is a couple of setup stitches. So on the front, I'm going to go in as if to purl and pull it and leave it. On the back needle, I'm going to go in as if to knit and leave it. And now we start the chant that gets us through the Kitchener stitch. I'm going to, on the front needle, knit, off, purl, and on the back needle, purl, off, knit. Knit, off, purl, purl, off, knit. Okay, so front needle, knit, off, and then go in as if to purl on that stitch and leave it there. Purl, off, and then the next stitch as if to knit. And then you give it a tug after you repeat those 4. Knit, off, purl, purl, off, knit, tug. Knit, off, purl, whoops, purl, off, knit, tug. Sometimes tugging isn't enough. You'll have to tug it more at the end, but we'll finish this up and see what it looks like. Knit, off, purl, purl, off, knit. okay, I'm down to just one stitch on each needle, and all I can do is the first part of the front and back needle in the little chant we're doing. So I can knit off and then purl off. That's all. I'm going to pull that tight and then take a look to see how it looks. This is a little loose, and this always surprises me that this is possible, but you can really pull on the Kitchener stitch until it's bunched up and then pull it to straighten it out to what you want. As long as you didn't split the stitches or snag anything, you can do that. And then poke the end to the inside and look at that. No seam. Feels great. And that's how you've finished cuff down socks. I can't even say cuff down socks. It's been so long since I've had a pattern that uses them. Anyway, those are all of the techniques used in my new Welsh heel sock pattern. I hope it helps. I hope you enjoy the socks. Good luck.